1 week of games left in the summer 23 season, and 3 teams have secured their seed for the upcoming playoffs. But which 3? And it may shock you, it is not the top seed. We just had a eureka moment before going live here that the Rhode Island Warriors technically can still be the number 1 seed and then really shake up some of those matchups that we're expecting to see in the semifinals and even possibly in the finals. But let's break down week 7 before we do some of that playoff preview stuff, even though there is still week 8 to go. But this is the week 7 postgame show. I'm joined by Sydney, Owen, and Nick. We'll get to those guys in a second. Week 7, no game within single digits. The closest game was probably that, I mean, they were all rematches, but was the rematch on court 3 between the Air Mambas and the Ice Treys, and it was the Ice Treys winning again. I believe every team that won the first time won again. And so not much of a rivalry week, in the sense of the term where kind of both teams have to win for there to be a rivalry. But we'll start with that game. Let's go right to actually, no, I lied. We're not starting with that one. I'm going to audible to kind of keep the flow going, but let's go to the most anticipated matchup, even though attendance again was an issue for Lob City. Lob City and the Game Breakers, and Lob City had a double-digit lead, I believe, in that first quarter, maybe early in the second, and then it kind of went all Game Breakers. We'll go in order on my screen. We'll start with Sydney here in that one, and kind of, I know it. I just want to see these teams both at full strength so bad. And if we get that again, that means my team doesn't win at all. So it's a little, it's a little catch, kind of thing there, unless they face off in the semifinals. There is a way for everyone to be happy in the world, nonetheless. But round 2 goes to the Game Breakers again as they, take down Lob City. Only 4 guys for Lob City, and I'm sure we'll see that in the stats, and that'll be part of your analysis. But Sydney, in this one, I mean, the Game Breakers stay undefeated, and they also won, we're looking forward to it and wanted a game, but can only play who shows up. And so what did they do, in week 7 to improve to 7-0?
Yeah, so they started off a little slow, definitely let Lob City take the lead in the beginning there. But second half, there was just the Game Breakers we're used to seeing, fast pace, getting those easy, fast breaks that got a lot of dunks at the end, and they were just connecting. And I think their shooting percentage was probably higher in the second half as well. They were definitely hitting more of those threes that really contributed to their lead.
Yeah, I mean, you see there on the screen, 15 threes and 15 for 39. You'll take it, right around 40% as a team. And, I'm sure Joe Secatore would have liked to have made a few more, going 3 for 12 himself, but everybody else kind of doing their thing from deep, and then also able to kind of attack the basket as Lob City wore down. And so I'll give Owen maybe the harder task, but not necessarily the harder task about Lob City. And if you saw anything from them this game, and it may be a no, because again, they were missing, Carl Lee was there, but he was hurt. And I kind of was talking to Cody today, and everyone else had something else going on. So it wasn't like, they of course would be there if they could, but, Owen, Lob City's perspective in this one, now they are one of those teams locked in as the 3 seed. 2 and 3 seed may not ultimately matter. But, what'd you see from Lob City in week 7, Owen?
I mean, despite the blowout loss that they took, they still played well in that first half. And I think the second half fatigue played a role. And like you said, Lob City didn't have Cody or some of their other players Colin. So going into that second half, if they have all their players, I think this is a whole new game. But like their first half, they showed that they can still hold their own even when they're not at full strength, which is honestly scary for all these other teams. That's no discredit to the Game Breakers, though. They're still probably the best team in this league.
Yeah, and they've earned that. Let's, put it that way. As if it took them 7 weeks to earn that. But looking at some of the stats, Jose Mercado, 38, and only 4 guys. So Cody Crawford, 2 for 13. I mean, I can still picture 2 of his threes because they were both deep, and one of them was on like a shimmy step back that you'll see by itself, which I usually don't post shooting clips by itself, but it was, even Gian was like shaking his hand after. Josh Smith, 16 and 12. And I just a shout out to him. I mean, he always kind of catches himself a lot of times on the wrong end of some of those plays, but he made a ton of blocks, and it says there 3, it feels like more than that. And it probably was, and even just altering other shots. He's been a huge part for this team, and will continue to be even when they are at full strength, for the things that he does around the basket, and protecting the rim and playing inside, and giving them that oomph. For the game breakers, Gian led the way with 37, Joe Secator 29, David DePina 28, and Hachi Amini 22, making their case for their 4 All-Stars, which we were talking about with them after the game. And there's only so many spots, so I guess we'll see how the voting goes. But Nick, even on this one, just to stay on the matchup that we were all anticipating, and I kind of want to see the quarter breakdown there. As you can see, 27-18, so not really a double-digit lead at the end of the first, but what stood out to you, Nick, in this one? And I know, we kind of touched on both ends, but with the playoffs coming up, I think it's always interesting to see kind of how teams play down the stretch.
I think what stuck out the most was the change from Jose Mercado starting the game was getting he was scoring with absolute ease, and it showed in the score. And then as soon as David DePina stepped on the court, he locked up and made it way more difficult for Jose Mercado. You could tell their defense stepped up, their offense stepped up. It seemed like the entire game stepped up for the game breakers as soon as he stepped on the court. I know he didn't finish the game even top 2 scorer on his own team, but it felt like a lot of the game, when at least it was competitive before it really broke open, he was leading the way in scoring, and then he was leading the way on the other end with his defense. So I would say he was the biggest difference maker for the game, and I would say the reason that they won by so much.
Yeah, and we always talk about Gian and Joe, right? And then, David DePino last year put up huge numbers on a team that maybe wasn't as good, but he was able to kind of make all the decisions. And now you see him on this team, and I know you guys may not have that comparison, but he's doing a lot of the same things, maybe, more effectively, right? And I think that's one of the things that even Gian said, and I was like, are the stats going to be there for all 4 of you guys? Like, they're all good players. It's not like that. It's just when you're all playing on the same team, it's like the Miami Heat thing, right? We're like, there's 3 of them, and so far, so good for the 4 of them, especially last night with those stats we rattled off. But over the course of a season, and then compared to some people on other teams, that's where it will definitely get interesting as we get into that all-star voting. Like I talked about, nearly 40% 3-point shooting for the game breakers, and 53% from the floor for them is Lob City, 7 of 37 from 3 and 40% from the floor. And the game breakers won the rebounding edge. I mean, tired legs are a thing, and so we don't have to kind of beat that into the ground for Lob City, but they did what they could, with what they had. So that's definitely fair. And game breakers improved to 7-0, and they get ready next week. I like to triple check because I almost can't believe it. They get to take on the Rhode Island Warriors next week, who are 6-1, and we'll get to how they got to 6-1. But there you go. That's how that was our moment, where if the Rhode Island Warriors win next week against the game breakers, despite, the entire season, the game breakers kind of leading the way, both teams would have 1 loss, and then that head-to-head would go to the Warriors. And so that would put the game breakers on the same side in the 2-3 as Lob City. So there's something to keep an eye on in that matchup in week 8 between 2 teams that, are going to play hard. And even Charles Alexander after the game was excited for next week, is to put it lightly. But Lob City 5-2, and they get the Air Mambas to kick off week 8. And so the Air Mambas are another one of those teams locked in, and we're going to get to their game right now over on court 3 in week 7, but Lob City and the Air Mambas in week 8, 2 teams that obviously have things to play for, but they're locked into their spots. It was the Air Mambas coming up short for a second time against the Ice Treys. And get to the right box score here. I was busy on the other court playing my game, but the Ice Treys jumped out early, and it looked like it was a third quarter for the Air Mambas that kind of turned it around. I know Sydney was over there. I'm going to make sure. I think everyone else was on court 1. Owen was over there. Oh, Owen's making a face. Cool. All right, we got 2 of you guys. Great. We'll go to Sydney first. The Air Mambas, and I saw some of the highlights. Shout out Luis Ortiz for that block, which you will definitely see on social media, because that was an awesome block for me playing catch up on that game. But Sydney, what stood out about the Ice Treys and kind of replicating, they beat this team twice, and that's fine. But even compared to maybe the last matchup, what was working well for them, led by Nick Lemoyne, but how did the Ice Treys do it?
Yeah, so even when Air Mambas were getting like on their tails and they were keeping the game close the whole time, Ice Trays just kept their composure and were just playing their game. They knew what they were good at. They were working that ball around and definitely getting it to Nick a little more to get those. They know he's their top scorer, so they were definitely trying to get him the ball. But even on the defensive end, they were still putting in the work and they were keeping their composure really well. And it wasn't like they were nervous at all, so it was really good for them, and I think that definitely helped them, whereas Air Mambas, I think a little composure was lost, so I think Ice Trays just kept it together better and just held on.
And Tyler Santana back with 13 points. I know he missed a couple games, and I haven't seen a ton of the Ice Trays, like the way I'm kind of like watching them play, and obviously I've seen all the teams, but I think he is almost like an X factor to me, maybe even if he isn't for that team. Like I just like his ability and his athletic ability. But Nick Lemoyne, 25 points and 7 rebounds. Luis Ortiz with 9, Seth Coates with 8. And Nick Lemoyne after the game talked about, having some of that size and some of that, shit talking, as he put it. That's a quote. We'll see how they do next week against the size of the halfway Crooks. But first, Owen, the third quarter. Air Mambas, at least by the score, which I'll scroll up really quickly, 18-9. So they won a quarter nearly by 10 points. Was there a moment where it got, a little interesting and there was a flash, or was it at that point kind of just them trying to get back in the game and the Ice Trays kind of squashed any hope for the Air Mambas?
I think there was definitely a flash. I thought this game was going to go down to the wire, but like Sydney said, the Ice Trays just kept their composure. The Air Mambas came out in that third quarter and they played great and they really cut it close. I think they might have even taken the lead at one point, but then the Ice Trays just stayed composed and the Air Mambas were all over the place. But overall, this game was great. And I don't know if it set a record, but there was probably 4 or 5 offensive fouls in this game. A lot of people were taking charges and it was a physical game throughout.
That might be a record. Yeah, that's you don't see a lot of that because a lot of times people are like, yeah, I'm good. Mario Valerio at 23, only 30% shooting. So I'm sure, he would have liked to have been a little more effective. Mark DaCosta with 15 and 5 threes. So I know Owen was scouting him for the 3-point contest. So we'll see if we can start a hashtag and make it a movement for Mark DaCosta. Anthony Ramsey with 10, and they scored 63 points and shot under 40% from the floor. 33 rebounds as a team to 34 for the Ice Trays. I think rebounds are, for the most part, and not always, but for the most part, a really good tell about a lot of these games, just because if a team's missing a lot of shots, other team's going to have a ton of rebounds, vice versa. And then offensive rebounds are obviously always huge to get some second chance buckets. But we'll kind of wrap up on this game there. And the Ice Trays, let me pull the standings really quick. With their third win, improved to 3-4 and currently find themselves all alone in that 5 spot. Like we've talked about, a big game against the halfway Crooks for them next week. But both of those teams, the halfway Crooks are locked in at the 4-5. The Ice Trays can get as high as 4, and they could still fall down to 6 if they were to lose and the Duje's boys were to win, because the Duje's boys beat the Ice Trays head to head, possibly week 4 or 5. But they just trust me. The Duje's boys won. So they can still climb up to 5, even though the Ice Trays currently sit at 5. For the Air Mambas, 1-6, and they'll be the 7th seed, taking on the loser of the Game Breakers and Warriors in week 8. Let's get to Nick and that court 1 game. The Duje's boys, like I said, I called it. PJ walked in the gym and goes, everyone's going to be there. I said, no way. Of course they are against the halfway Crooks. But Des Williams and Brian Yarst back, and some of the highlights and some of the stuff Brian Yarst was doing, it was a flashback game, and that always happens when they're playing. The team in purple is across the court from them. But Brian Yarst, a former MVP in this league in his first season, and was making some shots, making some plays, had a turnaround jumper at one point that was like, great defense and better offense. Not enough for the Duje's boys, as they do fall to the halfway Crooks, despite, as I told Spence and Devin Devampina after the game, my own team trying to give me a damn headache in the 4th quarter with all those turnovers. But we'll get to Nick about the halfway Crooks and it, being able to beat the Duje's boys without Dom Langston and Taj Eddington. So, kind of a role reversal there for the halfway Crooks not having their full team. And it was the Duje's boys with a full bench and a full squad. But Nick, Duje's boys, as I'm kind of looking at, and I'll put up on the screen, were able to kind of win the first quarter and keep pace. And then it was the second and third quarters that kind of flipped for the halfway Crooks and allowed them to get above 500 at 4-3.
Yeah, Brian Yars was back like he never left. He did what he did, 31 points on 42% shooting, on 26 shots isn't the worst. He was the reason that they were in the game for so long. I think not just on offense, you could tell that Duje's boys were making more shots and taking better shots than usual. But their defense was much better and way more improved than we've seen in recent weeks. I mean, in the first half, you could tell you guys halfway Crooks were not shooting well. Finishing the game 4 for 22 is not ideal from 3. But when you have Devin Pina and Jeff Winchell down low, you guys were able to expose the height difference and the size difference altogether. And I think that's where things really opened up for the halfway Crooks. Being able to see what was working, what wasn't working, and going to what was working in the second half, which was, like I said, going down low, was the difference maker in this, I think. But yeah, shout out to Brian Yars for showing out.
Yeah. And yeah, that's the best way to put it with him. But Devin Devon Pina, 32 points, 16 of 22 and 25 rebounds. Jeff Winchell, 13 and 10. And Spence Freeman, 12 and 5. I'll scroll down while we kind of keep it on the screen. I'm going to get Nick back in here and put him on the spot. So the Duje's boys, we talked about Brian Yars with 31, 3 of 12 from 3. Des Williams was back with 13. My dog agrees. But Nick, those two being back, you'd like to see more from Des Williams, obviously. But with this team, as they kind of get ready, they get a game against Ball Don't Lie, and then they get into the playoffs. If they get in the 4-5, it'll be a third matchup against the halfway Crooks. If they stay at 6 somehow, they would get Lob City in the first round. But let's kind of go with the assumption that it'll be a 4-5 matchup. They'll get the Crooks again in 2 weeks from today. What can they change, or what did they do in flashes, maybe in that first period, that is promising as they, in the playoffs, everybody's 0-0, right? So what can the Duje's boys take from this one?
I think just watching back the highlights in the game and reflecting on what they did, the ball movement and just the overall level of play. Yes, Brian Yars and Des Williams took the majority of shots, but at least watching it, it did not feel like it was just one of them two bringing it down and throwing up a shot. They were shooting open shots. Kyle Wolf was also seeing a lot of open shots. And I would say their strongest asset or skill set is their 3-point shooting. And just looking at it, 14% going 5 for 35 is, with the lack of a better word, terrible. So if they do what they do best, and that's, in my opinion, shooting, and they play the style of play that they did against halfway Crooks this week in the playoffs, all that's missing is just hitting the shots, and you could see an upset 100%.
For sure. And yeah, 5 for 35. It's close. We're competing with each other. 5 for 35 and 4 for 22. And I think your point for the Duje's boys is those two kind of taking a lot of the shots in rhythm, right? And so the ball kind of moving around, and Nick's agreeing, and that's the perfect way to put it, where it didn't feel like the ball was sticking, or they were the only two scoring, even though they were generating most of the offense. I think the last thing on this one, we've already kind of touched on, and I'll get to the week 8 matchups for each of these teams, but 52-21 on the boards. And so in favor of the halfway Crooks, without Dom Langston, who helps down low, and it just, allows the halfway Crooks to play an even bigger lineup, when the Duje's boys try to play Kyle Wolf. But shout out to him. A couple times PJ from the bench was like, stop the run, and Kyle Wolf hits a floater, like just doing some funky, like one-legged stuff, and it would go in. And so, hey, that's what, in those moments that team needed, and it kept them within striking distance for sure. But a third matchup will definitely be fun, and the Duje's boys will be ready. Let's put it that way. They get ready in week 8 to take on Ball Don't Lie. We'll get to their week 7 game, Ball Don't Lies, in 1 second. They are the last week 7 game, and the Halfway Crooks, like I've talked about, take on the Ice Treys, and with a win, the Halfway Crooks will lock up the 4, and the Duje's boys with a win would then need a Ice Treys loss, and I lost my place, but yes, the Ice Treys have an extra win right now. So the Duje's boys need a win and an Ice Treys loss to get up to 5 to not play Lob City and to take on the Halfway Crooks in their quarterfinal matchup in the playoffs. Let's get to those Rhode Island Warriors again. I know I kind of teased them a little bit in week 7. They took care of Ball Don't Lie. We'll kind of go the reverse order again in this one. Charles Alexander, I'll just give you his stat line off the top: 48, 18, and 10. And so, a lot of just easy dunks, 24 for 28 from the floor for him. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this game. We'll go Owen quick because I know Nick just killed it on the Duje's boys. He's probably got like a red Duje boy shirt underneath his freaking polo right now. And the Rhode Island Warriors continue to show up. I mean, Charles Alexander said a lot in that interview after, and I pushed him a little bit to kind of get some good stuff out of him and put him on the spot, but he handled it well. But it just, they think they're the best team, and they really haven't been proven otherwise yet. Week 8 is huge for them, but in week 7, just really taking care of business, and it's the Warriors coming out on top.
Yeah, they definitely took care of business. I will say probably the first 4 minutes, there was a glimpse of hope for Ball Don't Lie. They led like 9-4 at one point. They hit their first couple threes, but then it was like, oh wait, it's the Warriors. And they just took care of business the rest of the way, pretty much.
And Sydney, I'll let you jump in quick, and then we're going to do some week 8 one-word game. It's my favorite game, the only game you really play on here, but just kind of looking ahead to those week 8 matchups in terms of the playoffs, but not to short the Warriors. Charles Alexander, 48, like I mentioned. Marvin Dowdell, 31, 5 made threes. Henry Congalvez with 18, Robert Braxton with 11, and you see Eric Bowers there with 2, and then I'll go down to Ball Don't Lie and let Sydney jump in on this one, but Michael with 19, again, I'm not trying it. I got to ask him. I have to write a note to remember to ask him how to say his last name. Dan Mulaney with 18, and Ellis with 5 threes as well. Sydney, for the Warriors, even looking ahead a little bit to that game against the Game Breakers. I mean, this one, again, like Owen said, oh yeah, it's the Warriors, here they go, but just really kind of getting whatever they wanted, really going to the rim.
Yeah, it just feels like Charles Alexander can't be stopped. He goes straight down the middle, right to the rim. He knows what he's doing, and nothing can stop him. He just goes for it every time. And I feel like if you really want to stop him, you really got to get in front of him, maybe take those charges like we saw in the Air Mambas game. But it just feels like he's a powerhouse in that paint, and you can't stop him.
And kind of to bring it full circle, next week, standing across from him will more than likely be David DePina. So there we go. He just kind of made Jose's life difficult, as we talked about. And Jose still gets good looks, and, it's not that anyone really gets shut down, but we'll see. Let's see it. Let's get some David DePina and Charles Alexander action and see what happens. So we're going to start with that one. Do I want to really start with that one? Nah, we'll start with Lob City and the Air Mambas. We're going to get back to the Warriors. I promise we're not shorting them. But guys, for week 8, give me your one word and why. What stands out when you think about these matchups as far as when you try to think ahead to the playoffs, right? So I know the last week of the regular season, some of these teams are kind of already in their spot, and, not that they're going to look ahead a little bit, but we are. So when you hear Lob City and the Air Mambas, Nick, you get to go first. Your one word about this one, and then kind of how that word, relates to kind of both teams in the playoffs.
I would say chemistry. We've talked about a lot. Lob City's been short guys pretty frequently. And I think going into the playoffs, it'll be important to have at least see what it's like to have the entire team and build that chemistry. They've won it so many years. I'm sure their chemistry isn't really an issue, but I think it should be, something that I would like to see how they play with everybody, and, at least get one game with as many people as you can. And I think if they want to go far in the playoffs, they're going to need everybody, and they're going to need to be on the same page to do that. And I think the same goes for Air Mambas, where you can tell a lot of the players on that team have a lot of emotions, and whether it's them going at each other or congratulating, going with each other, positive or negative, you can tell they're not afraid to hold each other accountable and lift each other up, whichever way that goes. And I think if they're going to do something in the playoffs, they're going to have the chemistry as good as possible. And I think next week's going to be a good show for it.
I think that goes for a lot of teams. So very good point, especially as Cody Crawford has talked about in some of his interviews. Sure, they're Lob City and they've been here and they've done that, but it is nice to kind of, see it like this season with these players for sure. We'll go to Sydney. So your one word on this one, Lob City and the Air Mambas.
I'm going to say composure. I feel like these are two teams that really get heated during the game, and Lob City has a tendency to be arguing with the ref and not really being in the game. So maybe if they can cut that off and like stick in the game, they can really hold their own in this playoffs and definitely bring it the intensity that they need. And same for Air Mambas, they don't really yell at the refs a lot, but they yell at each other and they definitely get heated, and you need to work as a team and just pick each other up a little. So if they can work together better and keep that composure, I think they can really stay in this game.
Owen, go right ahead.
Strategize. I think both these teams are locked into their seedings. So if they can just go out and not necessarily go out and win the game for the Air Mambas, because based off this, I'm sure the low post will have a crazy line for this game. But I think if you go out there and strategize, you build up a little bit of a momentum going into the playoffs. I think that'll definitely help both these teams, because Lob City hasn't looked like they looked in years past, and the Air Mambas just need to find that thing that works for them and go for it.
Yeah, and even, Owen wins so far with the longest word with the most letters, just saying. So, you guys can try to come up with a longer word to, I guess, win the game. But yeah, for both teams, even, not that necessarily Lob has to try anything, but for the Air Mambas, like, I don't know, try something that maybe, you wouldn't have, tried in a game earlier this season, just to see what you have ready for next week. All right, the next one, we're gonna save the big one. I think that's the way to do it. So let's do Duje's boys and Ball Don't Lie. So your one word on this one. I know we talked about the Duje's boys a little bit and kind of what they're gonna take, or try to take into the playoffs. We'll go back to Sydney and we'll kind of flip it around because Nick, he could pull your polo back down so you cover up the Duje's boys shirt. But Sydney, your one word on this one, Duje's boys and Ball Don't Lie, kind of as we look ahead to both of those teams in the playoffs.
Patience. I think they just need to work for those open shots, and if they're shooting well, I think it'll be a closer game than anticipated, but they just need that patience to just work for the shot and not rush anything and just play their game and not let the other team get in their head at all.
And before I let you guys jump in, assume everyone will be there, but I think things can get really interesting if maybe Brian Yaris and Des Williams aren't there, and the Duje's boys, I'm sure, would like to win this one to give themselves a chance into that 4-5, rather than playing the third seeded team. So just want to put that out there. Not that I expect them to win. I think that's the fair thing to say, but it gets a little more intriguing depending on who shows up for them based on their attendance issues in the past couple weeks. All right, Nick, well, you can get it out of the way. For this game, what's your one word?
I would say confidence. I think what Ball Don't Lie, as we all know, likes to shoot. 54 threes this past week is absurd. And I think that's the best way they can go about it if they want to win, since size isn't really in their favor. And so if they can shoot with confidence and play with confidence, because to be fair, they do hit a good amount of threes. They just also take a ton. But if they can shoot it with confidence and play with confidence, I think they'll play a lot better. And I think the same goes for Duje's boys. I think their record is clearly not good. But I think that's largely to do with a short attendance, and that kind of not giving them much confidence in general. They have good players that are outside of just Brian Yaris and Des Williams, but they don't seem to have the most confidence when they're not there. And I think if they play with confidence, then they'll look much better.
Owen.
Nick's gonna beat me with the letter count for this one, but I'm gonna go with business. Duje boys, they got to take care of business. They have to win and have another team lose to jump up in seeding, but they can't worry about the other game. They got to just go out and win. And as far as ball don't lie, kind of similar to the Air Mambas, go out and try something. See what you can do. See if you can make a splash and do something.
And I was messing around with the stats just now, and you can kind of sort it on the website. And so speaking of 3-pointers, the Game Breakers actually have made the most 3-pointers by 16 so far this season over any other team. And that second place team is Ball Don't Lie with 71. So there you go. And the third place team is the Duje's boys. So despite all of their attendance issues, Duje's boys third, and then the Warriors and halfway Crooks bringing up the rear because we like to save our shooting for the playoffs. Don't worry, it's coming. We will go to that game next. The halfway Crooks and the Ice Treys, and two teams that, if things fall a certain way, could play again for a second time in a row the next week in that 4 or 5 matchup possibly. But now we kind of get to start into some of the maybe a little closer matchups. Back to Owen. Let's see if he can reclaim his letter count for his one word about the Ice Treys and the halfway Crooks.
I'm trying to think of a long word. I'll go with preview. This, like you just said, this could be a preview of the following week. And even on another level, both these teams are good enough where they can make a run in this playoffs. So I want to see what they can both do in the game and like see if they can carry it over towards the next week and just build on what they have already built so far.
Sydney.
I'm gonna go with intensity. I feel like both these teams have a intensity that can definitely go either way for them. Although I do think halfway Crooks might have the upper hand, but I would like to see Ice Treys bring a big intensity, play their game, and just do what they've been doing. I feel like they have a good momentum. Not to say that halfway Crooks doesn't have a momentum because they're definitely got it going, but just an intensity that will shape the playoff games.
All right, Nick, it's your chance. To suck up. Everyone's doing an all right job. The last word had a lot of letters in it. All right, here we go.
I'm gonna say scared. I think this is a big game for both teams. They can match up in the playoffs. I think next week is gonna be a good sign to see who's gonna run, who's scared of who, whether that be just the whole game overall or whether halfway Crooks has some big guys. And Ice Treys likes to jump in the paint. Let's see what that looks like. Are people going to be jumping? Are they going to be running from each other? And just overall, what that matchup will look like. Because I don't think anyone really has a clear picture of it.
All I will say is by messing around with these stats, the halfway Crooks are last with 34 made threes. The Ice Treys second to last with 39 made threes. And then if you do attempted, both teams have attempted the fewest. All right. So at least like they're not, they're like first in attempts and like second to last in makes, right? All right. So at least that's kind of consistent. So that means it's going to kind of be not necessarily about the 3-point shot, which then favors, let's say, just the bigger team. And so I think that's where the advantage will be in that game. If you wanted a biased take, just as the podcast does their entire freaking episode. All right, let's go to the last game, which again, like we talked about, is for the top seed and could affect some of those matchups in our quarterfinals in our first round of the playoffs. We have the undefeated Game Breakers taking on the 1-loss Rhode Island Warriors. And just like Charles said, their 1 loss, a 5-point loss to Lob City. The Game Breakers don't even have a loss. So there you go. What one word is, these teams could match up again. Not even really in the semifinals, no matter what. The rematch would come in the finals between these two teams. So possibly a finals preview. What's your one word, Sydney, for this one?
Definitely going to lose the letter count here, but I think pace. Both these teams love to get their fast breaks, love to get those easy baskets, easy dunks. So if one team can control the pace over the other, I think it'll go in their favor. But defensively, if they can slow it down, stop them, make them shoot those shots that they normally are hitting, but maybe stop them a little, this game could go either way.
All right, Nick.
I'm going to say star power. This game,
Hold on, that's hyphenated. You're cheating. Just so you know, that one is disqualified for the letter count, but that's fine. Go ahead.
fair enough. There's a potential to have 6 all-stars on the court at the same time. We've talked a lot about Marvin Dowdell and Charles Alexander as a duo, and we've spent equal amount of time talking about the 4 players on Game Breakers, as in Gian, Joseph, David, and Hachi. It's going to be interesting seeing what that looks like with that many good players on the court. It's going to be interesting.
All right, Owen, it's not fair. It's like the bottom of the ninth. This is, one chance, and I'm sure it won't be hyphenated.
I'm walking it off.
All right, go ahead.
No hyphens, and I'm not using a 4-letter word like pace. I'm going with showdown. Like you said, this is a finals preview. This is the 2 best teams, I think, in my opinion. And more specifically, Gian versus Charles. I think this game right here has a lot to do with who's going to win MVP, even though it's week 8. And but like you said, the seeding matters. One of this team could be the 1, the other could be the 2. This game is pretty much everything on the line but the title so far.
I don't even know who won. It doesn't matter. The points are made up, so you're all winners. But I will say, I think it's fair to say, and this is actually hurts me to say, but I think both teams would prefer to be the 1 seed. Not that either of them necessarily care, because I think all of those, I'm sure every team to some degree thinks they can beat anyone else. But I'm sure, being a 1 seed would be nice for a couple different reasons. I was going through the stats, and then we'll wrap it up by team. And, the Game Breakers, with their style of play and how fast they play, have they lead the league as a team in points and, let's get it actually right? Field goals made, field goals attempted, 3-pointers made, like we talked about, not even 3-pointers attempted. They are, I know this isn't the best television, but they lead the league in rebounding by 2 over the halfway crooks, despite maybe their lack of size. The one thing that stood out to me, because kind of in all of those categories, as you go down the row, the Game Breakers, if they're not first, are close, but ahead of the Rhode Island Warriors. And not that means they're going to win. They're just slightly better over 7 games in a lot of these categories. The one that stands out, which is interesting, the Rhode Island Warriors lead the league in offensive rebounds. Okay, 93. Second is the halfway crooks with 86. That's just a way for me to get a halfway crooks, positive thing in there. But third is the Game Breakers with 83. So it's a 10 rebound difference divided over 7 games. It's 1 offensive rebound a game difference. But if that's something that the Rhode Island Warriors do kind of win in this game, it can maybe make up for some of the 3-point shooting. Getting some of those extra possessions in this game is going to be huge. And we'll end on this. Gives them an extra possession. It also takes away a possible maybe long rebound and a fast break 2 points for the Game Breakers, where they are so deadly. So it's kind of twofold, and it's almost a 4 or 5 point swing in those scenarios, keeping the ball on your offensive end rather than giving the Game Breakers a relatively easy basket for their standards. I mean, they make it all look pretty easy, but some of the players we've talked about. All right, last thing, and I surprised you guys, make a pick for next week, Warriors or Game Breakers, putting you on the spot. Owen wants to try to win the 1-word game. He's going first. Who you got? Just pick a team. We already explained everything enough. It's been 43.5 minutes. Just 1 word. It's what team you got, Owen?
The Game Breakers. They're going undefeated.
That's more than 1 word. He loses. Nick?
Game Breakers.
Okay. I get it. The Game Breakers is 2 words. You don't lose. Owen actually did 5 words. Sydney?
Warriors.
All right, so it's 2-1, right? We got a little. All right, Game Breakers, Warriors. Good job, guys. Next, I muted myself. Come ready with longer words. That's the week 7 post-game show. Next week on the show, we'll have the seeds figured out. We will break down all the first round matchups. We'll kind of recap while previewing the teams that are going to play in the quarterfinals. Every team makes it, all 8 teams, 1-8, 2-7, 3-6, and 4-5. You can watch all the week 8 games live on YouTube, youtube.com/legacy leagues. That's the show. For Nick, Owen, Sydney, I'm Joey. Thanks for watching.